Hello, my name is Rohan Titus. I was born in Sri Lanka and came to Australia as a little boy at the end of the White Australia policy. So in 1972, we were one of the first cohort of skilled migrants that came through after that policy ended. And I can remember attending Anzac Days in Brisbane in the early 70s when the Vietnam War was still going. I attended high school in Sydney at Sydney Church of England Grammar School, Shaw School, and I did Army and Air Force cadets there. And my mother was quite concerned I might join the ADF, and I thought, no, I don't want to do that. Don't mind playing with toy soldiers, but don't want to be one. Anyway, I graduated from a law degree and joined the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade in 1995. And in 1997, I found myself as the Bougainville desk officer in Canberra. And through the course of that year, the 10-year civil war that had been raging on Bougainville came to a truce point, and I was part of the team for those truce negotiations. And when they all came off, the Bougainvillians who'd been part of that peace negotiation said, well, we want you to come out as one of the truce monitors. We don't trust these people, we don't know them, we've got to know you. So DFAT released me and a few others, and I was part of the first group of truce monitors to go to Bougainville in 1997. We arrived on the island in November of that year. And when we got there, because the PNGDF and the ADF had been working so closely together over so many years, from before Kokoda through till the 90s, the Bougainvillians said, oh, you're Wontoks with PNGDF, and we've been fighting against them, so we don't trust ADF. So they wouldn't let the ADF outside the perimeter of the Arawa base, and Lolaho Arawa, where the truce monitoring team started, they wouldn't let ADF outside that. So the first group of people outside the perimeter were New Zealand Defence Force and Pacific Island contingents from Fiji, Vanuatu, a few other places as well. And they Solomon Islands also had a few people there, and us civilians. So we were the first ones outside once the truce had been called, going around in beaten up old Land Rovers and saying, hey, there's a truce, don't shoot, around all over the island of Bougainville. And so I was part of the team that set up the office in Booker in the north, and we opened up 5 team sites across the island over the course of that first 3 months. And then I found myself being sent off to my first posting as a DFAT officer to the Brunei Darussalam. It was the Australian High Commission in Brunei Darussalam, and that, as you know, is on the South China Sea. That was a diplomatic posting, so no warlike operations, but I did a lot of work there as a diplomat, looking at what was happening in the South China Sea, and as part of Australia's Five Powers Defence Arrangements, which is Australia, Malaysia, UK and New Zealand working together, and a lot of military people involved in the Butterworth side of that operation. But the British have Gurkhas permanently based in Brunei, tropically acclimatised there. So I did a little bit of work there, and then came back to DFAT in 2001, and I found myself as the desk officer looking after sub-Saharan Africa in our Africa and Middle East branch. And towards the end of that year, 9/11 happened, and I found myself, because we didn't have an Afghanistan desk back then, I found myself working on things to do with 9/11 and follow on from 9/11, and that culminated in me being moved to the Iraq Task Force in 2002, in the phase before the invasion of Iraq. I went from there to do a few other jobs in DFAT, and then found myself in Sri Lanka in 2004-5, end of 2004, beginning of 2005, and there was a civil war that had been going in Sri Lanka for a while there, and I was working with a number of people in the counter-terrorism space there. As a civilian, unarmed, mostly talking to people, but doing quite interesting work in counter-terrorism financing and so on. From there, I came back home and got posted next to Jordan in 2008. So I was in Jordan from 2008 to 2012. And at the end of my tour of Jordan, they said, "Mate, there's a job in Kandahar if you're interested." And a good friend of mine had just been blown up in Tirinkot and was still recovering from that. Another civilian, David Savage, whom I'd worked with in Sri Lanka. And so my wife wasn't entirely sure this was a good idea, but in the end we thought, yeah, let's do it. So I was the civilian representative, the Australian civilian representative in Kandahar in 2013 as part of the ISAF mission. I was there for about 6 months, and then we closed that office because we were in retrograde, and I moved to Tirinkot. So I was in Uruzgan as part of the combined team Uruzgan as a civilian, again working for DFAT, unarmed in Uruzgan for 6 months from middle of the year to the end when we closed our Australian presence in Uruzgan. The last civilian left in November. I was the second last civilian, and the last one was Fred Smith. And he always likes to have the last word and have a bit of a song about it. So he did a concert for the parents and family members of people who'd been killed in the south, and he flew out and joined us, and we met up in Dubai, and then we came home at the end of November 2013. And then I was in Canberra for a couple of years working on Afghanistan from DFAT. And I deployed again to the embassy in 2017. And I was in the embassy for 2 years, 17-18. And then I did 6 months as part of the NATO Resolute Support Headquarters. So this was a deployment as a civilian to the Senior Civilian Representative's Office. This was a German diplomat, and it's part of the headquarters structure was the US had a 4-star general as the military commander of the Resolute Support Mission, and the Senior Civilian Representative was there to coordinate the civilian side of the military operation, essentially. So I was in his office for 6 months, and then left that, joined the UN for 2 years, and I was the Chief of Political Affairs for the United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan until 2021, when things looked very much like it was time to come home. So I came home in May of that year, and I've been home ever since, which is my appreciation of Australia goes up and leaps and bounds every morning. I live in the village of Gunning, New South Wales, which is about an hour north of Canberra. Very few public servants in my town, mostly farm people. It's great sheep country. It's where some of the finest merino in the world comes from. I live there, and I thoroughly enjoy it. Every morning I wake up and I look around me and I think, yeah, this is very different to Afghanistan and Iraq and Syria and the jungles of Bougainville and other places I've been. You look at it every day and you think, yeah, totally worth looking after this place. Why would a diplomat in the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade find themselves doing all these crazy things? Well, diplomats have always been involved in conflict zones, and when you think about things like a white flag, you think, oh, that's a surrender or a truce flag. It's actually the flag of a diplomat. There's someone who you don't shoot at, who gets to talk across the field of parley in the medieval terms. So, the knights each had their coats of arms, and if they were coming into parley as a diplomat or as a herald, then they carried a white flag, which meant they were non-combatant. So, in all of my experiences overseas, I've always been unarmed. And in the modern Australian parlance, we had diplomats in Singapore when Singapore fell, and the Australian Consul General was killed by the Japanese in that conflict, and the third secretary was taken prisoner of war for the duration. His son was a diplomat, and I served under his son for a while there, so I knew all about John Quinn Sr. and his service in World War II, which we don't talk about very much, but he served the entire war from the fall of Singapore through till liberation of Java as a prisoner, where he had consistently made representations to, for the conditions of the prisoners and conditions he shared through that conflict. After World War II, we had Australian diplomats in Saigon, and one of the colleagues who I worked with in my first year in the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade had actually been evacuated from the roof of our embassy in Saigon. So she'd told me all about that and how she ended up being taken in a US Chinook Iroquois helicopter and landed on I think it was the Kitty Hawk that they put her onto, and then pushed the helicopter off the side, and the next one came in. And on Bougainville, I was in a Iroquois helicopter that dated back to the Vietnam War, which belonged to the New Zealand Air Force, Defence Force. And I remember thinking, well, they didn't push them all over the side. So there's a lovely piece of continuity for me there. We lost a diplomat in Vietnam. He was machine gunned to death while travelling along the Mekong River. So diplomats had been in harm's way through all those conflicts. In all of those cases, we operate under the Vienna Convention, diplomatic rights and immunities, which means we can't carry weapons. And we are civilians, we're not combatants, and that arrangement allows us to engage in communication with all parties to the conflict. So we talk to other diplomats, we talk to civilians, we talk to members of the public. What the military call the red space is the enemy, the green space are allied forces, the blue space are your fellow combatants on your side, and civilians are often referred to as the white space. So we engage with the white space, and we talk about sustainable development. We talk about hearts and minds campaigns. We engage in serving Australia's national interest overseas in some very complicated spaces. So not everyone ends up going to those places, but that seems to have been where my career's directed me for a good chunk of it. This is a complicated thing. We're not allowed to wear camouflage or be in military uniforms because under the laws of war, if you're in camouflage, you're potentially a combatant. So we're wandering around in southern Uruzgan going into an Afghan village, and I'm in civilian clothing. Now, obviously it's dangerous, so I've got body armour on, but I can't have camouflage, which is, quite awkward. Because snipers love to work out which one of you is the odd one out. So that's always going to be me. I'm always the odd one out. And not much fun standing out where everyone else in the team, including the interpreters, are all in camouflage and, I'm in King G's. It's not ideal. We are obviously able to move in military vehicles, so that's helpful. With the UN jobs, you are travelling in a white UN vehicle or a white UN helicopter. On Bougainville, we painted the helicopters bright red so they were sort of an orangey red. So to distinguish from military aircraft, we were truce keepers. We were not armed, and so under the terms of the agreement, don't shoot at the red helicopters was part of the deal. They didn't always listen to that, and you would take a bit of fire from the ground, but not very much, thank goodness. And the whole point of it is to go around and actually say, hey, there's a truce. So we had flyers that we'd made up, and we had a little block of text that we'd read out in Tok Pisin or in English and say, Mihama Maslong Lookim you, nice to say goodbye and nice to say hello, and there's a peace. Belisi means feeling relaxed, feeling good about yourself, and that's the name of the mission in Bougainville. For southern Afghanistan, we would negotiate the conversation before we went somewhere. So you'd call up and you'd say, "Can I come and visit you?" And they'd say, "Yes, we want to talk to you." And you'd say, "Well, can you guarantee my security?" So you're running a risk, because anyone listening to that conversation knows we're going to be there. So we wouldn't say, "Oh, we're going to be there at 10 o'clock. We'd say, "We'll come in the next 2 days," And we might contact them maybe 15 minutes before and say, "We're coming now. Can you make sure you're there?" So that made it a bit more manageable. But we were always, the military guards who were around us were armed, but they were not on hostile operations. So if we encountered fire, and if I was around, the policy was to turn around and go away again, not to press on and engage the enemy, because you're on a peaceful mission to try and have a conversation, not a kinetic operation. The thing to remember about Australia is we are a liberal democratic country that is respectful of the rule of law. Now, that's a luxury not everywhere has. And when we do deploy in a military operation, that's the end state we're hoping to achieve in the country we go to. We're not going to conquer. We're going to re-establish stability and hopefully peace, and do nation building work and things like that. So the whole motivation for someone like me, a civilian, to be overseas is to build that development environment. So a very different mindset to kinetic military operation. So my objectives are much more long-term. They're generational, 2 or 3 generations ahead. And the effects I'm trying to create, I'm part of a mission to create on behalf of the development of peace and good order globally, is to enhance the rule of law, to improve literacy, to provide clean water, a peaceful environment where people can conduct their business and kids can get education and so on. Hospitals can flourish, and people can go about a peaceful day's business without fear of harm coming to them and their loved ones. So those are all things that you can really invest in. As a responsible citizen of this planet, you can see real purpose in that. And it's a tremendous honour to be given a chance to actually see those things firsthand, and to be part in a tiny, tiny way of achieving that around the world. And that serves Australia's purposes as well as the country you're in. So there's a tremendous amount of goodwill from the people you talk to, and a real sense of purpose to that. And the joy of being in the Australian government is, when we're overseas, it's very, very much Team Australia. So everyone, ADF, DFAT, back in the day when I started, there was AusAid, but now it's all part of DFAT. But the NGOs that we work with, the international community we work with, there's a single purpose to all of that. And Australia is very well regarded. So when you go somewhere as an Australian, you're welcomed, you're liked, you're wanted. And even in conflict spaces, because I'm dealing with civilians, the overwhelming sense is that Australia is a responsible player in that space and a collaborative partner for peace. So I've always felt very much like I'm doing something where the people I'm talking to want me there, and that's extremely helpful, because you feel like you've got purpose and you feel like you're doing something that's making the world a better place. One generalisation I can definitely make is people are people. Wherever you are in the world, wherever I've been, and I've been to a lot of places, people want peace. They want an opportunity to live safely. They want an opportunity to do something meaningful and productive in their life, where the outcome of their effort is of benefit to them. And they want that for themselves, their spouses, their children. They want that for their community. And if you're part of that in any way, and they can see the connection to that, then it's no different to being in the Rural Fire Service when there's a bushfire and you go into the community, right? Everyone makes you sandwiches and cups of tea when you're on a break, because they know you're doing something for their good, and you're wholly welcome in that space. Exactly the same overseas. If you've turned up and your purpose is good and they understand what they're doing, they can get on board with what you're doing because you've got on board with what they need. And so once that message is clear, then they're totally on board. Now, the challenge is, of course, getting that message across. Why am I there? What am I doing? There's all these conflict zones, have been conflict zones for decades. It's very, very hard to build trust. And building trust requires person-to-person connection. And you start with the people you know, and then build to their friends and their contacts, and build from that to the next and the next and the next. So in a country like Bougainville, where there's a high degree of literacy, I got to know a couple of people before we went, and they were my entree into those communities. The peace talks in Cairns in Australia before the actual truce started, they were the ones who said, "Oh, we want you as part of the team." So when I arrived and got off the plane, they were there, people I'd already met. In Bougainville, that peace has held from 97 to now, because it was all built on those relationships. So those communities were ready for peace and they wanted peace, and they just couldn't get there. Iraq and Afghanistan are a little bit different, because there's a lot of things at play there geopolitically that keep the conflict going. But there again, the communities are communities. The people are exactly the same as the people you live with here. Village is a village, and if you can help them with ordinary everyday things, then they're completely welcoming. And if you're just going to come and talk at them in a suit, that's not very useful. But if you're happy to help them clean out a well, or help them resolve a conflict with their neighbours, then they're completely on board. I have a sense of great optimism for the world. There will always be conflict. There will always be people who want something and are happy to harm others to get it. And I think the most important thing is not to worry about that. Not to worry about whether you're going to win or lose, but worry about which side you're going to be on. And you can always choose the side, right? So you choose the side that matters to you, and then the outcome doesn't matter at all, because it's worth it. And I think our side is winning as well. So peace, global order, the world is a safer place than it was in the past. And as we build towards greater global prosperity and greater stability, there's going to be peaks and troughs. There's going to be periods of conflict and periods of greater prosperity and peace. But there is a movement towards greater communication between peoples. that never existed 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago. So yes, there is an inevitability to world peace. It's just not going to happen tomorrow. And as I said, if you can pick what side you want to be on, pick the side that gives you the greatest sense of peace and calm and sense of purpose as you can, well then inevitably we'll end up with a better place tomorrow than it was today. The UN has a thing called Sustainable Development Goals. These started as Millennium Development Goals before 2000, and the world has targets set for making things better, and it has metrics against which it measures those things. And we are getting better. We are feeding more people. We are attending to the health needs of more people. We are housing more people. We are building slowly but surely a more equitable distribution of resources around the world. Not everyone's on board with that mission, and so development towards that end is patchy. But there is no question that Australia is working towards a more peaceful, more stable, more prosperous neighbourhood. And I'm not speaking as a DFAT person, I don't work in DFAT anymore, so just as a private citizen, I can see things have got better since I joined the Department of Foreign Affairs in 1995, right? The world is a incrementally better place in a lot of places, not uniformly and not everywhere, but in most places there is a chance of things being better. And you start with hope and you work from there. In the 80s when I was a kid, I don't know if people can remember Band-Aid and the terrible famines in the Horn of Africa that led to the world suddenly becoming aware on a people-to-people, ordinary person level what it was like in these situations of great deprivation. And prior to that, you became aware through newsprint. It wasn't quite as impactful as live footage. And I think this is more and more a thing. The generations that come after us are very much more interconnected across countries, and that has to be a good thing. I mean, they're much more able. I look at my daughter and her friends and that generation, and I think, yeah, this is actually much more hopeful for the future than mine. So yeah, I think so. I think the world is getting better. I think the gap is potentially there to get smaller, and the technology is certainly there for us to develop the world in a better way if we are able to do it. And if the will is there, then I think the purpose can certainly be achieved.